They're attacking Earth. The Galactic Council watched in horror. Part 2. The Calm Before the Storm. 6 days. That was how long humanity had before the Drelith Armada arrived at the edge of the Sol system. 6 days to prepare for the largest military assault the galaxy had seen in over a century. Most species would have spent those 6 days in panic. Humanity spent them in silence. Fleet Admiral Katie Dunham had not slept more than 3 hours a night since the Sovereign Protocol was activated. She stood in the heart of Iron Cradle, the underground command center buried a full kilometer beneath the Rocky Mountains. The room was enormous, lined with screens that showed every corner of the solar system in real time. Officers moved between stations with the quiet urgency of people who had rehearsed this exact scenario 1,000 times and were now doing it for real. Katie had spent 26 years in the military. She had risen through the ranks, not because she was loud or aggressive, but because she was precise. She did not waste words. She did not waste ships. And she did not waste time. Every officer in Iron Cradle knew that when Katie gave an order, it was because she had already considered and rejected every other option. "Give me an update on the outer belt," she said. Commander Noah Pratt appeared on the main screen. He was aboard a small command vessel, hidden in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Noah was thin and serious, with dark eyes that never seemed to blink when he was focused on something. He had spent the last 4 years mapping every rock in that belt, and he knew the position of every hidden weapon platform humanity had placed there. "All 48 stations are active," Noah reported. "Railguns are charged. Energy batteries are online. Mines are deployed across a 300 million kilometer corridor. If they come through the belt, they are going to have a very bad day." "Good," Katie said. "And Jupiter Wing?" The screen shifted to show Lieutenant Commander Grace Harmon, standing on the flight deck of the carrier Gallant Ridge, which was tucked behind one of Jupiter's moons. Grace was young for her rank, barely 32, but she had the steadiest hands in the fleet. She had been flying combat simulations since she was 19, and had never once panicked under pressure. Her pilots trusted her completely, because she never asked them to do anything she was not willing to do first. "All fighter wings are prepped and loaded," Grace said. 240 pilots, fueled and armed. "We are ready to launch on your word, Admiral." Katie nodded. "Hold position until I call. Do not reveal yourselves until the moment is right." "Understood," Grace replied. On Mars, a young engineer named Danny Cook was running final checks on the planetary shield generators. Danny was not a soldier. He was a builder. The kind of person who talked to machines the way other people talk to dogs. He had helped design the shield network himself, hiding the generators inside what the galactic inspectors believed were automated mining rigs. For 15 years, those machines had sat in the red dust of Mars, looking like nothing special. Now they were humming with enough power to deflect orbital bombardment. "Shields are at full capacity," Danny said, wiping sweat off his forehead with the back of his hand. "Mars is covered. Earth generators are being handled by the ground teams. We will be sealed up tight before they get here." On Titan, Saturn's largest moon, a communications officer named Penny Aldrin was powering up a web of signal-jamming satellites. Penny was quiet and precise, the kind of person who could listen to 100 signals at once and pick out the one that mattered. Her job was to blind the Drelith, to fill their sensors with noise and confusion the moment they entered the system. "Jamming network is live," Penny reported. "Once they drop out of faster-than-light travel, I can cut their long-range communications within 90 seconds. They will not be able to call for reinforcements or coordinate across their fleet without significant delays." Katie listened to every report. She stood in the center of Iron Cradle, like the hub of a wheel, with every spoke reaching out to a different corner of the solar system. Everything was falling into place. The truth was simple. and it was the one thing the Galactic Council had never understood about humanity. Humans did not trust peace. They wanted it, they worked for it, and they hoped for it, but they never trusted it. From the very first day that Earth made contact with the wider galaxy 60 years ago, there had been people who asked the question, what happens if they come for us? And so, quietly, across generations, humanity had built. They built warships in secret shipyards carved into asteroids. They built weapons platforms disguised as mining equipment. They built fighter craft in underground factories on the moon. They built shield generators, sensor arrays, drone manufacturing plants, and enough ammunition to fight a war that most people hoped would never happen. The official fleet, the 600 ships registered with the Galactic Council, was real, but it was a mask. Behind that mask stood nearly 4,000 combat-ready vessels, over 50,000 automated combat drones, orbital gun stations around every inhabited body in the system, deep space minefields, and the most advanced electronic warfare network any human engineer had ever designed. All of it hidden, all of it waiting. While Earth prepared, the Galactic Council on Atherin Prime opened a long-range observation feed of the Sol system. This was standard practice for cleansing campaigns. The Council believed in witnessing such events, partly out of respect for the species being destroyed, and partly as a reminder to every other species of what the Draelith were capable of. The observation chamber was a large circular room adjacent to the main council hall. Screens covered every wall, showing sensor data, fleet positions, and live visual feeds from deep space relay satellites. Dozens of delegates filed in and took their seats. Some brought food and drink. A few brought junior aides who had never seen a cleansing campaign before and wanted to learn. Curator Silith of the Valesi arrived early. She set up her personal recording equipment in a corner, adjusting the lenses of her cameras with careful tentacle movements. She planned to make a documentary about the fall of Earth. She had done this before, for 2 other species. She approached it with a kind of mournful professionalism, the way a historian might record the destruction of an ancient city. It was sad, but it was important to remember. High Arbiter Zelen Morath took his place on the elevated platform at the center of the chamber. He sat very still, his forearms folded, his compound eyes reflecting the light of the screens. He had seen this before. He knew how it ended. The Ortani delegate sat in the back, already composing a report for his homeworld about the expected outcome. The finale delegate had brought a small crystal that his species used for memorial prayers. Ambassador Liam Beckett walked in last. He did not bring food or recording equipment or prayer crystals. He sat in his assigned seat, folded his arms, and watched the screens. A few delegates nearby glanced at him with soft, pitying expressions. One of them, a small furry being from a species called the Nali, leaned over and whispered, "I am sorry, Ambassador. Truly." Liam nodded politely. "Thank you," he said. "Nothing more." The hours passed. The screens showed the Sol system sitting quiet and still. Earth, blue and green. Mars, dusty red. Jupiter with its bands of cloud. Saturn and its rings. Everything looked peaceful, almost sleepy. The edge of the system lit up. The Draelith Armada dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a single massive wave. 9,000 warships, arranged in the formation that the galaxy had come to know and fear. They called it the Iron Tide, a vast crescent of metal and fire that swept forward like a jaw closing. Each ship was dark and angular, built for one purpose: destruction. Warlord Kesrat's flagship sat at the center of the formation, a dreadnought nearly 2 kilometers long, bristling with weapons. He opened a broadcast on all frequencies. "Inhabitants of Sol, kneel or be erased." The council observation chamber was silent. Every delegate leaned forward. Every screen showed the same thing. 9,000 warships, facing a system that was supposed to have 600 defenders. There was no reply from Earth. The Sol system sat in silence. 1 second, 2, 5, 10. Then across the entire solar system, energy signatures began appearing on the sensor feeds. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. Hidden ships powered up their engines. Concealed weapons platforms activated. Asteroid stations opened their armored shells and revealed the guns inside. Drone bays on the Moon and Mars and Titan began launching swarms of small, fast, unmanned fighters. The sensor display on the Council screen, which had shown 600 human ships moments ago, climbed past 1,000, then 2,000, then 3,000, then 4,000. The numbers kept rising as drones and automated platforms joined the count. High Arbiter Zelen Morath stood up from his seat. His mandibles were clicking rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. Curator Sillet's cameras were still running, but her tentacles had gone completely still. In his seat, Ambassador Liam Beckett unfolded his arms. He leaned forward slightly, watching the screen. The faintest trace of a smile crossed his face. The galaxy had come to watch humanity die. They were about to see something very different. They're attacking Earth. The Galactic Council watched in horror. Part 3. The Battle of Sol. Warlord Kesrath had conquered 6 star systems in his career. He had burned cities, shattered fleets, and walked through the ruins of civilizations that had begged him for mercy. He had never once felt doubt before a battle. But as the sensor screens on his flagship began to fill with thousands of energy signatures that were not supposed to exist, he felt something cold settle in his chest. He pushed it aside. The Draelith did not retreat. The Draelith did not hesitate. He gave the order to advance. The iron tide surged forward into the Sol system. 9,000 warships moved as one, their engines painting trails of blue fire across the black. They had crossed 100 light-years to get here. They expected to be home within a week, carrying trophies and dragging prisoners. Instead, they flew straight into a wall of death. Humanity had seeded billions of kilometers of space with smart minds, tiny devices no bigger than a person's fist that drifted silently in the dark. Each one carried a shaped charge powerful enough to punch a hole through starship armor. They activated the moment a Draelith ship came within range, locking on and accelerating to impact in less than a second. The leading edge of the Draelith formation came apart. Ships that had survived decades of war were torn open by weapons they never saw. Explosions bloomed in silence across the void, brief flashes of orange and white that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Over 200 Draelith vessels were destroyed or crippled in the first 3 minutes before the fleet had even passed the orbit of Neptune. Kesrath watched the casualty reports scroll across his command screen. His jaw tightened. He ordered the fleet to spread out and push through. Mines were an annoyance, not a strategy. The real battle would come when they met the human ships. He still believed his numbers would carry the day. Deep in the asteroid belt, Commander Noah Pratt sat in the dim light of his command vessel and watched the Draelith approach on his tactical display. Each red dot was an enemy warship. There were still thousands of them, even after the minefields. Noah had known the mines would not stop them. That was not their purpose. Their purpose was to thin the herd and make the Draelith angry, because angry enemies made mistakes. "All stations, hold fire until they enter the kill zone," Noah said into his communicator. His voice was flat and even, the voice of a man who had rehearsed this exact moment in his mind 100,000 times. Let them come deep. Let them think the belt is empty. The Draelith armada entered the asteroid belt in a loose formation, weaving between the massive rocks. Their sensors swept the area, but Penny Aldrin's jamming network on Titan was already doing its work. The Draelith scanners showed static and ghost signals. They could not tell the difference between an asteroid and a hidden weapons platform until it was too late. Noah waited. He watched the red dots move deeper into the belt. Closer, closer. Then he gave the order. All stations, open fire. 48 hidden platforms fired at once. Railguns accelerated slugs of metal to a fraction of the speed of light, punching through Draelith armor like needles through cloth. Directed energy weapons sliced across hulls, cutting ships in half. The asteroids themselves seemed to come alive, spitting fire from concealed ports that had been sealed for years. The Draelith fleet, caught in a crossfire from every direction, lost another 300 ships in the first volley. Chaos erupted in their formation. Captains broke ranks, trying to identify the sources of fire. Some ships turned to engage the platforms, but exposed their flanks to other stations. Others tried to push through the belt at full speed, only to hit more mines on the other side. Kesrath roared orders from his flagship. He pulled his fleet together through sheer force of will, and directed a massive strike force of 2,000 ships to bypass the asteroid belt entirely, swinging wide around it and driving straight for Earth. If he could not crush the defenses piece by piece, he would cut off the head. This was exactly what Katie Dunham had expected him to do. She had studied every Draelith campaign in recorded history. When their initial advance was disrupted, they always sent a hammer blow at the enemy's homeworld. It was predictable. And she had placed Grace Harmon and the Jupiter Wing directly in the path that hammer would have to take. Grace was already in her cockpit when the order came through. She had been sitting in it for 6 hours, running checks, adjusting her weapons, and talking quietly to her pilots over the squadron channel. Some of them were scared. She could hear it in their voices, the way they laughed a little too loud, the way they asked unnecessary questions about things they already knew. She did not tell them not to be afraid. Fear was honest. She just told them what she always told them before a flight. Stay on your wingman. Trust your training. And if you see a shot, take it. The Jupiter Wing launched from behind the gas giant's moons in a wave of 240 fighters, supported by the carrier Gallant Ridge and 3 escort frigates. They hit the Draelith strike force from the side at full speed, tearing into the formation before the enemy even knew they were there. Space around Jupiter became a storm. Fighter craft weaved between capital ships, firing bursts of energy and kinetic rounds into weak points on Draelith hulls. The Draelith, who were used to fighting enemies that stood in neat formations and waited to be destroyed, had never faced this kind of combat. The human pilots were fast, unpredictable, and completely unwilling to die quietly. Grace led from the front. Her fighter danced between enemy ships, landing precise shots on engine ports and weapons arrays. She called targets for her wingmen, redirected squadrons to fill gaps, and kept the entire wing moving like a single organism. For 40 minutes, the battle around Jupiter raged without pause. But the Draelith had numbers, and numbers eventually tell. The strike force regrouped and began to grind forward, absorbing losses and pressing on. Grace's wing was pushed back. Ships were lost. Good pilots who had trained for years vanished in bright flashes of light that lasted less than a second. Then, the Gallant Ridge took a direct hit from a Draelith heavy cruiser. The carrier's midsection buckled, and fires broke out across 3 decks. Grace received the damage report on her screen, and knew immediately that the ship was dying. She ordered all surviving pilots to fall back to the escort frigates, then turned her own fighter around and flew back to the carrier. She landed in the burning hangar bay, ran to the bridge, and took command of the crippled ship. The Gallant Ridge still had engines, and she still had one last thing she could do with them. She aimed the carrier directly at the Draelith heavy cruiser that had hit her, and pushed the engines to full power. The crew evacuated into escape pods as the ship accelerated. Grace was the last one out, ejecting from the bridge pod just seconds before the Gallant Ridge slammed into the enemy cruiser at full speed. Both ships were destroyed in a blinding explosion that was visible on sensors across the system. Grace's escape pod tumbled through the debris field, battered and scorched. She was recovered alive 4 hours later by a patrol ship. She had a broken arm and burns across her shoulders, but she was conscious, and her first words to the medic were, "How is the battle going?" Back in Iron Cradle, Katie Dunham watched the Drelith strike force finally break through the outer defenses and push toward the inner system. They had paid dearly for it, losing over 1,000 ships in the belt and around Jupiter. But they were still coming. There were still thousands of them. Katie did not panic. She had planned for this, too. She gave the order that activated the inner defense network. Planetary shields powered up around Earth and Mars, shimmering barriers of energy that the Drelith had no idea existed. Orbital gun stations around both planets opened fire, sending streams of heavy ordnance into the approaching fleet. And from hidden silos on the Moon, on Mars, on Titan, and on a dozen asteroid stations, over 50,000 combat drones launched into space. The drones were small, fast, and expendable. Each one carried a single heavy warhead and enough fuel for one attack run. They swarmed the Drelith fleet like insects, attacking from every angle, clogging sensors, and forcing enemy ships to waste ammunition on targets that cost almost nothing to replace. The Drelith advance stalled. Their ships were surrounded, harassed, and bleeding from 1,000 small wounds. Kesrath, standing on the bridge of his flagship, looked at the tactical display and saw something he had never seen before in his life. His fleet was losing. On Atherin Prime, the observation chamber had gone completely silent. Not the respectful silence of a memorial. The shocked silence of people watching the impossible happen. High Arbiter Zelen Marath was standing at the railing of his platform, all four arms gripping the metal so hard that it creaked. Curator Silith had stopped recording. Her cameras were still running, but she was not watching them. She was watching the screens with her mouth open. The Ortani delegate had left the room entirely, and word spread that he was contacting his homeworld in a panic. In his seat, Liam Beckett sat still. His arms were folded. His face was calm. He watched the screens the way a man watches the sunrise, not with surprise, but with quiet satisfaction that the world is doing exactly what it is supposed to do. On the main screen, the Drelith fleet began to pull back. For the first time in 400 years, a Drelith cleansing campaign was retreating. Katie Dunham watched the red dots move away from Earth and opened a channel to every human ship and station in the system. Her voice was steady and clear. "They came here, thinking we were prey. Let us finish correcting that assumption. All ships, advance. They're attacking Earth?" The Galactic Council watched in horror. Part 4. The Reckoning. The Drelith did not understand retreat. In their language, the word for withdrawal was the same as the word for shame. For 400 years, no Drelith commander had ever needed to use it. Now Warlord Kesrath stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched his fleet pull back toward the outer edges of the Sol system, bleeding ships and leaving trails of wreckage behind them, like a wounded animal dragging itself through the dirt. He had entered the system with over 9,000 warships. He now had fewer than 5,000, and many of those were damaged. The humans had done something that no species in recorded galactic history had ever done. They had stopped the Iron Tide. And now they were chasing it. Commander Noah Pratt led the pursuit. After the asteroid belt ambush, Katie Dunham had placed him in command of the forward fleet, a mixed force of warships, refitted cargo haulers with weapons bolted to their hulls, patrol ships, and the ever-present drone swarms that followed the human fleet like clouds of angry insects. The force was not elegant. Some of the ships were dented and scarred, held together with emergency patches and stubbornness. But every single one of them was still fighting. Noah studied the Drelith retreat from his tactical display. He had spent years reading every piece of intelligence humanity had gathered on Drelith military doctrine. He knew their patterns the way a hunter knows the habits of the animals he tracks. And he could see that Kezrath was not simply running. The retreat was too orderly, too deliberate. The Drelith fleet was pulling back toward a cluster of heavy cruisers positioned near Neptune's orbit. Kezrath wanted the human fleet to chase him into a crossfire. "He is baiting us," Noah said to his bridge crew. His voice was calm, almost thoughtful, as if he were discussing a chess problem, rather than a battle that had already killed thousands of people. "He has his heaviest ships waiting near Neptune. He wants us to charge in, and then he will close the jaws around us." His tactical officer, a young woman named Abby Tate, looked at him. "So what do we do?" Noah allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "We send something he doesn't mind biting." He ordered the drone swarms forward. 20,000 automated combat drones surged ahead of the main fleet, racing toward the Drelith position at speeds that no crewed ship could match. They were expendable, and that was exactly the point. Kezrath saw them coming on his sensors and gave the order to spring the trap. His heavy cruisers opened fire from their concealed positions, pouring energy into the drone swarms and destroying them by the hundreds. But while the Drelith were focused on the drones, Noah moved the real fleet. He split his forces into 3 groups. One continued straight ahead, making itself visible to keep Kezrath's attention. The other 2 swung wide, arcing around the edges of the battlefield in long, curving paths that used the gravitational pull of Neptune and its moons to mask their approach. By the time Kezrath realized what was happening, it was too late. The 2 flanking groups emerged on either side of his heavy cruiser formation and opened fire. The Drelith found themselves caught in the same kind of crossfire they had planned for the humans. Their heavy cruisers, built to absorb punishment from the front, were hit from the sides where their armor was thinnest. Ship after ship buckled and broke apart. Kezrath tried to reposition, tried to rally his captains, but the coordination that had held the Drelith fleet together was crumbling. His communications were still disrupted by Penny Aldrin's jamming network. Orders arrived late or garbled. Ships that should have moved together moved separately, and Noah's forces picked them apart one at a time. In the middle of the chaos, Grace Harmon arrived. She had been recovered from her escape pod, treated for her injuries, and given command of a destroyer called the Cold River. Her arm was in a brace and her shoulders were wrapped in burn dressings, but she had refused to stay in the medical bay. The battle was not over, and she intended to see it through. Grace took the Cold River into the heart of the Drelith formation. She had studied Kezrath's flagship during the earlier fighting. The massive dreadnought had powerful forward weapons and heavy armor on its nose and flanks, but its engines were exposed at the rear and were protected by a relatively thin layer of shielding. If those engines could be disabled, the flagship would be stranded. She led a small strike team of 3 destroyers on a high-speed run through the battle, weaving between burning ships and fields of debris. Drelith fighters tried to intercept them, but the human ships were faster and more agile. Grace pushed the Cold River to its limits, cutting so close to enemy vessels that her bridge crew could see the scorch marks on their hulls through the viewports. The strike team reached the rear of Kezrath's flagship and opened fire. Concentrated volleys of kinetic rounds and energy beams hammered the dreadnought's engine section. The shields held for 30 seconds, then 40, then began to flicker. Grace ordered her ships to focus all fire on a single point. The shields collapsed, and the engines blew apart in a cascade of explosions that left the massive ship drifting and powerless. Kezrat's flagship was dead in space. The most feared warship in the Dralith fleet was now nothing more than a very large piece of metal floating in the dark. In Iron Cradle, Katie Dunham watched the tactical display update in real time. The Dralith fleet was shattered. Thousands of their ships were destroyed. Hundreds more were damaged and drifting. Kezrat's flagship was disabled. The remaining Dralith vessels were scattered and disorganized, some still fighting, others trying to flee toward the edge of the system. Katie opened a direct communication channel to Kezrat's flagship. It took a few minutes for the Dralith to respond, but eventually, the face of Warlord Kezrat appeared on her screen. He looked different from his earlier broadcast. His yellow eyes were dull, and there was a cut across the side of his face where something on his bridge had broken and struck him. He stared at Katie with an expression she had seen before in old war footage. The expression of someone who has just realized that everything they believed about the world was wrong. "Warlord Kezrat," Katie said. Her voice was steady and clear. There was no anger in it, no gloating, no satisfaction, just the voice of a woman stating facts. "Your fleet is defeated. Your flagship is disabled. You have lost this campaign. I am offering you terms." Kezrat said nothing for a long moment. His jaw moved slightly, as if he were chewing on words he could not bring himself to say. Katie continued, "Full and immediate withdrawal of all Dralith forces from the Sol system. A non-aggression pact between the Dralith Dominion and humanity, effective immediately and binding for a minimum of 100 years, and the release of all species currently enslaved by the Dominion within 5 standard years." Kezrat's eyes widened at the last demand. "You dare to dictate terms about our internal affairs?" "I do," Katie said, "because if you refuse, I will bring this fleet to your homeworld, and you now know that I can." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Kezrat looked at the tactical display on his own bridge, at the wreckage of his armada, at the human ships that were still advancing, still fighting, still refusing to stop. He looked at all of it, and then he closed his eyes. "I accept your terms," he said. The words sounded like they were being torn out of him. The transmission ended. Katie leaned back in her chair and let out a long, slow breath. Around her, the officers in Iron Cradle began to realize what had just happened. A few of them cheered. Most of them just sat in stunned silence, staring at their screens. On Atherin Prime, the observation chamber was in chaos. The Council had just witnessed something that no living being in the galaxy had ever seen. A Dralith surrender. High Arbiter Zelen Morath had called an emergency session immediately. The mood had shifted from disbelief to something darker and more complicated. Some delegates were elated. The Dralith had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, and someone had finally stopped them. But others were afraid. If humanity had been hiding this level of military power all along, what did that mean for the rest of the galaxy? What else were they hiding? And what would they do now that everyone knew what they were capable of? The Council voted to hold a closed session to discuss what they called the human question. Ambassador Liam Beckett was asked to leave the chamber. He stood without argument, straightened his coat, and walked toward the exit. He did not look back. In the hallway outside, he found Curator Silith waiting for him. She was leaning against the wall, her tentacles wrapped around herself in what Liam had learned was a sign of deep thought among her species. She looked at him with her wide, dark eyes. "Ambassador," she said quietly, "why did your people hide their strength? All these years, you sat in that chamber and let everyone believe you were weak. You let them pity you. Why?" Liam stopped. He thought about the question for a moment, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wanted to say it right. "Because we were hoping we would never have to use it," he said. We joined this council to find friends, not enemies, but we built those ships because we know what the universe does to those who cannot protect themselves. Silith was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "And what will you do now?" Liam looked at the closed door of the council chamber. He could hear muffled voices on the other side, dozens of species arguing about what humanity was and what humanity might become. "That depends entirely on what happens inside that room," he said. "They're attacking Earth." The Galactic Council watched in horror. Part 5. The New Order. The closed session of the Galactic Council lasted 3 days. During that time, Ambassador Liam Beckett was not allowed inside the chamber. He was given a small guest room in the diplomatic wing of Atherin Prime and told to wait. So, he waited. He ate his meals alone, read reports from Earth on his communication device, and stared out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, among those tiny points of light, the wreckage of 9,000 warships was still drifting through his home system. Somewhere out there, men and women who had fought and bled to protect their planet were being treated in medical bays or being laid to rest in the cold silence of space. He thought about them constantly. He thought about Grace Harmon, who had rammed a dying carrier into an enemy warship and lived to tell about it. He thought about Noah Pratt, who had outmaneuvered the most feared military commander in the galaxy, with a fleet held together by patches and willpower. He thought about Danny Cook and Penny Aldrin, who had spent years building systems in secret, never knowing if they would ever be needed. And he thought about Katie Dunham, who had carried the weight of an entire species on her shoulders, and never once let her voice shake. They had done their part. Now it was his turn. Inside the council chamber, the debates raged. The 42 species of the Galactic Council were trying to answer a question that none of them had ever expected to face. What do you do when the species you dismissed as weak turns out to be the strongest thing in the room? The first faction, led by the Ortani delegate, argued for immediate sanctions against humanity. They wanted Earth to disarm, to reduce its military to the registered 600 ships, and to submit to regular inspections by a council oversight committee. The Ortani were afraid. They had spent centuries building their own defenses around the assumption that the Draelith were the biggest threat in the galaxy. Now a new power had appeared overnight, and they did not know what it wanted. The second faction, led by Curator Silith of the Valesi, argued the opposite. Humanity had just done what no other species had ever managed. They had broken the Draelith war machine. The galaxy owed them gratitude, not punishment. Silith spoke passionately about the years she had spent watching cleansing campaigns, recording the deaths of entire civilizations, while the Council did nothing but offer memorials and refugee programs. She said that humanity's hidden strength was not a betrayal of trust. It was a rational response to a galaxy that had failed to protect its members. The third faction was quieter and more dangerous. Led behind closed doors by the Ortani and a handful of smaller species, this group had begun secret communications about forming a military coalition against Earth. Not an attack, not yet, but a united front that could deter humanity from expanding or making demands. They wanted to contain the humans before the humans decided to contain everyone else. High Arbiter Zelen Morath sat at the center of it all and tried to hold the council together. He was old, even by Korath standards, and he had seen more of the galaxy's failures than most. He had watched 3 cleansing campaigns and done nothing to stop them. He had offered Liam Beckett a memorial ceremony and refugee petitions. He had looked a man in the eye and told him that his species was going to die, and he had done it with the calm authority of someone who believed he was stating a simple fact. He had been wrong, and he knew it. On the second night of the closed session, Zelen called his senior aides to his private quarters. He stood by the window, looking out at the stars with his compound eyes, and said something that none of them expected. "We failed them," When the Drelith came for humanity, we offered pity, not ships, not soldiers, not even a formal condemnation. We offered to remember them after they were dead. And now we sit in that chamber, arguing about whether to punish them for surviving. He turned to face his aides. I will not let this council destroy itself with fear. On the third day, Zelen sent word to Liam Beckett. The ambassador was invited back into the chamber. Liam walked in wearing the same plain dark suit he always wore. Every seat was occupied. The air was thick with tension and the low hum of translators working overtime. Liam walked to the speaker's platform at the center of the room and looked up at the hundreds of faces watching him. Some were hostile. Some were curious. Some were afraid. A few, like Silith, were hopeful. He carried a single data tablet. On it was a proposal drafted by Fleet Admiral Katie Dunham, the Joint Planetary Defense Command, and the civilian government of Earth. Liam had helped write parts of it himself, sitting in his small guest room while the Council argued about humanity's fate. Members of the Galactic Council, he began. His voice was the same as it had always been, quiet and steady. I know that the events of the past 2 weeks have changed the way many of you see my species. I understand that some of you are afraid of what we might do with the strength we have shown. I will not insult you by pretending that your fear is unreasonable. If our positions were reversed, we would feel the same way. He paused and looked around the room. But I am not here to make threats. I am not here to make demands. I am here to make an offer. He activated the data tablet and projected its contents onto the main display screen. The proposal was written in plain language, translated into all 42 council languages. It contained 3 points. First, humanity would not expand its military presence beyond the Sol system. Their ships and weapons were built for defense, and they would remain defensive. Second, humanity would share its defensive technology with any council member species that requested it. Shield generators, sensor networks, weapons platforms, drone manufacturing techniques, all of it would be made available freely and without conditions. Third, humanity proposed the creation of a joint galactic defense pact, open to all council member species, so that no single civilization would ever have to face a cleansing campaign or any other act of aggression alone again. If one member was attacked, all members would respond. The chamber was silent when Liam finished. He stood at the platform and waited. He could see the confusion on the faces of the delegates. They had expected an ultimatum. They had expected humanity to leverage its victory into power, territory, or dominance. That was what every strong species in galactic history had done. You fight, you win, and then you take what you want. Instead, the humans were offering to give away the very technology that had saved them. Curator Silith was the first to speak. She rose from her seat, her tentacles spread wide in the Valesi gesture of openness. I support this proposal, she said. Humanity has earned the right to be heard, and what they are offering is something this council has needed for 400 years. The Quarath delegation followed, then the finale. Then, one by one, species that had spent 3 days arguing about sanctions and coalitions began to shift. The logic was difficult to argue with. Humanity had just proven that it could defeat the most powerful military force in the galaxy. If they wanted to conquer, they could try. Instead, they were choosing to protect. The Ortani delegate sat in silence for a long time. The secret coalition he had been building was falling apart around him as its members turned toward the human proposal. Finally, he looked at his aide, shook his head, and raised his hand in support. The proposal passed with an overwhelming majority. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy began to change. Commander Noah Pratt was promoted and placed in charge of the new Joint Galactic Defense Initiative. He traveled to a dozen worlds, meeting with alien military leaders and helping them design defense networks tailored to their systems. He approached each one with the same calm, methodical patience that had guided him through the Battle of Saul. Grace Harmon, her arm still healing, was invited to the Valesi Naval Academy, the oldest military training institution in the galaxy. She became the first human instructor there, teaching combat tactics and fighter doctrine to species that had never needed to fight before. Her students were terrified of her at first. Within a month, they would have followed her anywhere. Danny Cook and Penny Aldrin were assigned to technical assistance teams. Danny helped 3 different species build planetary shield networks, adapting his designs to fit worlds with different atmospheres, gravities, and geological conditions. Penny set up communications and early warning systems that connected the member worlds of the new Defense Pact, so that an attack on any one of them would be detected by all of them within minutes. Fleet Admiral Katie Dunham retired from active command. She had given 30 years of her life to the military, and she was tired. On her last day, she stood before the assembled officers of Iron Cradle and gave a short speech. She did not talk about victory or glory or the battle. She talked about fear. "We built our strength in the dark because we were afraid," she said. "Afraid that the galaxy would come for us and that no one would help. That fear drove us for 60 years. It made us strong. But strength born from fear can still be used for good. The galaxy now knows what we are capable of. Let us spend the rest of our history making sure they remember us for what we chose to do with that capability, not what we could have done." She stepped down from the podium, shook hands with her officers, and walked out of Iron Cradle for the last time. On Atherin Prime, the council chamber hummed with activity. New treaties were being drafted. Trade agreements were being renegotiated. For the first time, the Galactic Council was not just a place where species came to talk. It was becoming a place where they came to build something together. Ambassador Liam Beckett sat in his usual seat, watching it all. He had been Earth's representative for 3 years, and in that time, he had gone from being the man everyone pitied to the man everyone wanted to talk to. Delegates who had once looked past him now sought his opinion. Species that had offered humanity memorial ceremonies now asked for engineering consultants. He still wore the same plain suit. He still spoke in the same quiet voice. He still listened more than he talked. One evening, after a long session of negotiations, he sat alone in the observation chamber. The screens were dark. The room was empty. He pulled out a small notebook, the kind made of real paper, which was something of a curiosity among species that had abandoned physical writing thousands of years ago. He opened it to a blank page and thought for a moment. Then he wrote a single line. "They watched us, expecting us to die. We gave them a reason to live." He closed the notebook, tucked it into his coat, and sat for a while longer in the quiet room, looking out at the stars. Then he stood, straightened his coat, and walked back to the council chamber, where the work of building a galaxy worth living in was waiting for him. There, attacking Earth, the Galactic Council watched in horror. Part 1. The Warning Nobody Believed. The council chamber on Atherin Prime was the largest room Liam Beckett had ever stood in. It curved upward like the inside of a shell, with hundreds of seats carved into the walls in rising tiers. Every seat held a delegate from a different species. Some were tall and thin, with skin like wet stone. Others floated in liquid tanks or breathed through tubes connected to machines on their backs. 42 species sat in that room, and every one of them had been part of the Galactic Council for longer than humanity had known the stars were suns. Liam had been Earth's ambassador to the Council for 3 years now. He was a patient man with a quiet voice, the kind of person who listened more than he spoke. He wore a plain dark suit, which made him look small and dull compared to the shimmering robes and bioluminescent skins of the aliens around him. That was fine with him. He had learned early on that most of the galaxy did not take humanity very seriously, and he had stopped trying to change their minds with appearances. He was in the middle of presenting a trade proposal about mineral exports from Mars, when the lights in the chamber flickered, and a sharp tone cut through every translator in the room. An emergency signal. The kind that had only been used 11 times in the Council's history. The massive display screen at the center of the chamber came to life, showing a transmission from the outer rim. The seal of the Dralith Dominion filled the screen, a circle of claws gripping a burning star. Then, a face appeared. It was scaled and broad, with deep-set yellow eyes, and a jaw lined with teeth that looked like they had been sharpened on purpose. This was Warlord Kesrith, Supreme Commander of the Dralith War Fleet. He spoke in the guttural Dralith language, and the translators did their work. The Dralith Dominion has declared a cleansing campaign against the species known as humans, and their home system, designated Sol. Our fleet is already in transit. This campaign will be completed within 14 standard days. Any interference by Council member species will be treated as an act of war against the Dominion. The transmission ended. The chamber was silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then it erupted. Delegates rose from their seats. Voices overlapped in dozens of languages. Translators buzzed and crackled, trying to keep up. Liam stood at the speaker's platform in the center of it all, watching the chaos unfold around him. He did not move. High Arbiter Zelen Morath, the insectoid leader of the Korath delegation and the current head of the council, struck the ceremonial chime 3 times to restore order. He was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 arms and a hard black shell that gleamed under the chamber lights. His compound eyes swept the room as the noise slowly died down. "Order," Zelen said, his voice deep and resonant through the translator. "We will have order." The delegates settled, though the tension in the room was thick enough to taste. Zelen turned his gaze toward Liam. "Ambassador Beckett, you have heard the declaration. The Dralith fleet numbers over 9,000 vessels. Our records show that Earth's registered defense fleet consists of approximately 600 ships. Do you wish to make a statement?" Liam looked up at the High Arbiter. He could feel every eye and sensor and optical organ in the chamber fixed on him. He cleared his throat. "I do," he said. "I would like to formally request that the Council condemn this unprovoked act of aggression and consider a joint military response." The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. Liam could see it on the faces and bodies of every delegate who had a face or body to read. The slight turning away, the lowered gazes, the gentle shifting in seats. They felt sorry for him. The Valesi ambassador, a graceful being with translucent blue skin and long tentacles that moved like water, spoke first. Her name was Curator Silith, and she was known for her compassion. "Ambassador Beckett," she said softly, "the Council sympathizes deeply with humanity's situation. But the Dralith Dominion has never lost a cleansing campaign. In 400 years, every species they have targeted has fallen. The Council does not have the military strength to challenge them directly. I am sorry." Others followed. The Ortani delegate, a squat creature with 4 eyes and gray-armored skin, said that his people would be willing to accept a small number of human refugees. The Finale delegate, a being that looked like a walking tree with glowing leaves, offered to preserve samples of human culture in their archives, so that Earth would not be entirely forgotten. One by one, the galaxy offered humanity its sympathy. Not its help, its sympathy. Zelen Morath eventually called Liam to a private chamber behind the main hall. The room was small and plain, designed for difficult conversations. Zelen lowered himself into a reinforced chair and looked at Liam with something that might have been genuine sadness. "Ambassador, I will be direct with you. The Council will not intervene. The Dralith are too powerful, and no species wishes to draw their attention. I have seen this happen before. I have watched 3 cleansing campaigns during my time as High Arbiter. None of those species survived." He paused. "I suggest you begin preparing refugee petitions. We can arrange for a memorial ceremony after the campaign concludes. It is the least the council can do. Liam listened to every word. He nodded slowly, politely. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small communication device. He typed a short message, encrypted it, and sent it. It would take 11 minutes to reach Earth at faster-than-light relay speeds. A message contained 2 words, Sovereign Protocol. He put the device away and looked at Zelen. Thank you for your honesty, High Arbiter. I appreciate the Council's concern, but I must respectfully decline the offer of refugee arrangements and memorial services. Zelen's mandibles clicked in confusion. Decline? Ambassador, you do not seem to understand the scale of what is coming. 9,000 warships. The Drelith have burned entire worlds. I understand perfectly, Liam said. His voice had not changed. It was still quiet and calm. Earth will handle this. Zelen stared at him for a long moment. Then he made a sound that the translator rendered as a sigh. I admire your courage, Ambassador, even if it is misplaced. Liam returned to the main chamber. He took his seat among the delegates, folded his hands in his lap, and said nothing more. Around him, the council moved on to other business. A few delegates glanced at him with the kind of look people give to someone who does not yet know they are already dead. 11 light minutes away, the message arrived at a deep underground facility buried beneath the Rocky Mountains on Earth. The room was dark and cold, filled with screens and consoles and the low hum of machines that never slept. Fleet Admiral Katie Dunham read the message on her screen. She was a woman in her early 50s, with short gray hair and steady hands. She had spent her entire career preparing for a moment she hoped would never come. She read the 2 words 3 times, then picked up a secure phone connected to every military installation on the planet. This is Admiral Dunham, she said. Sovereign Protocol is active. Wake up the whole family. Across 6 continents, beneath oceans, inside mountains, and under the dust of the moon and Mars, lights began to turn on. Doors that had not opened in decades slid apart. Engines that had been cold for years began to warm. Men and women who had trained in secret for their entire careers stood up from their stations and began to work. The galaxy had given humanity its pity. Humanity had no use for it.